If you know some German, or maybe even a lot of German, you might think that it's easy to translate the English preposition on. Well, it's just AUF, isn't it? Yeah, well, it's actually a little bit more complicated, I'm afraid. There are at least 6 German prepositions that we use to express the English idea of on, like all of these ones. Yes, we've got auf, but we've also got an, in, mit, zu, and even unter, and probably 1 or 2 more like ÜBER and WEITER. So our job for today is to break this down so that we know which one we need to use and when. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Berger und das ist jetzt Bausteine 3. Herzlich willkommen. Now, to make this easier, we're going to look at 3 main uses of this preposition, then dive a bit deeper into each category because this is where the interesting stuff happens. So let's get a move on. I'd say our most obvious use involves location. When we think about on, we probably think about where something is. But we've got all of these different kinds of locations, so we'll need to check them out one at a time. In all of these situations, we could describe the location by using the English preposition on. And in all but 1 or 2 examples, we're just going to use either auf or an. So this will be a nice easy start for us. Let's start with physical location. We'll use auf if we're talking about a location on a, well, more or less horizontal surface, and an if the location is either on or next to a surface or an object that's, well, more or less vertical, or maybe the end of something or the edge of something. Let's check out some examples so it just makes a little bit more sense. Meine Tasse steht auf dem Tisch. Wir sitzen oben auf dem Berg. Er liegt auf dem Sofa. These are all horizontal surfaces, so we're using auf. But with vertical surfaces, edges and ends, we'll have some examples like these. Das Bild hängt an der Wand. Wir sind an der Küste. Mein Termin ist am Wochenende. Okay, well, that's reasonably straightforward, I guess. And the good news is that since these prepositions are two-way prepositions, now if you're not sure what I mean, then watch this video up here, then we can use them too to describe movement towards a location. This will be all those times where we could use either on or onto in English fairly interchangeably. Let's check out some examples with both prepositions. Ich stelle die Tasse auf den Tisch. Ich hänge das Bild an die Wand. Or wir fahren an den Strand. Er legt sich auf das Sofa. And again, we're using auf for those more or less horizontal surfaces and an for the vertical surface and edges like the wall and the coast. So there's 2 kinds of locations, but we've also got locations in time. In English, we talk about what happens on certain days, on parts of days, or on groups of days like the weekend. And we've got a whole video on this too, and it's linked up here somewhere if you need a refresher. Well, in each case, this is just in German, which is of course just a contraction of an and dem, or on the. Am Wochenende geht sie spazieren. Am Dienstagmorgen geht sie einkaufen. Am Dienstagabend schauen sie fern. This brings us now to our next kind of location, and this time it's virtual location. We use auf if we're talking about something on any kind of streaming platform. Wir schauen Filme auf Netflix. Ich schaue Videos auf YouTube. And if it's just TV in general, then we need to use im. Ich sehe die Nachrichten im Fernsehen. But we're back using an if we want to use on in a more abstract sense. For example, ich arbeite an einem Artikel, or ich schreibe an einem Artikel. This tells us what I'm working on. This leaves us with a couple of final outliers for physical locations. If you live, for example, on the 3rd floor of an apartment block, then you'll use in German. Ich wohne im 3. Stock. Or perhaps Sportartikel findet man im zweiten Stock. And similarly, if you're on the bus or on a plane, so describing your location inside some kind of transport, then we'll use the preposition in. Ich bin im Zug, im Flugzeug oder in der Straßenbahn. But here it's important to point out that if you're describing your means of transport rather than your actual location, then we need to use mit. Ich fahre mit dem Zug. Wir fahren mit der Straßenbahn. This could be translated as either I travel on the train or maybe I travel by train. But let's move on now to more idiomatic translations of the preposition on. And these can be, I think, a little bit trickier. We've already mentioned the means by which we get around. We've had on the bus, on the train. And in those situations, we used mit. But if we go somewhere on foot, then we need a different preposition. Ich gehe zu Fuß in die Stadt. Sie gehen zu Fuß durch den Park. And here's one you'll probably know already. Das ist ein Buch über Musikgeschichte. Or this one, ich schreibe einen Aufsatz über die deutsche Kunstszene. In each case, we're using über where we'd use the preposition on in English. Now, some of our other examples are a little bit more complicated, so let's consider this example. Du darfst ausgehen, aber nur unter der Bedingung, dass du vor 11 wieder zu Hause bist. Here we're using the phrase unter der Bedingung, which we translate as on the condition. You're saying that this person is only allowed to go out if or on the condition that they're back home by 11. Let's take another example. It's fairly common in English. On the whole, we could say, beim Imbiss gibt es manchmal etwas Gesundes zu essen. Aber im Großen und Ganzen ist es alles ziemlich ungesund. Or maybe, sie war letztes Jahr ziemlich krank, aber jetzt ist sie im Großen und Ganzen gesund. Last year she was pretty sick, but now on the whole, she's healthy. Let's move on to another idiomatic equivalent of on, and this is another useful one. Here's an example. Das Paket von Amazon kam heute pünktlich an. Or die Straßenbaustellen wurden planmäßig fertiggestellt. You'll see that we're not using any prepositions at all here, even though in English we'd say either on time or on schedule. Now, another useful example is this one. Someone might say, Deutsch ist schon sehr schwierig. Whereupon you can say, ganz im Gegenteil, es ist sehr einfach. Here, our English equivalent would be on the contrary, where you can use it to contradict someone who's making what you consider to be an incorrect or inaccurate statement. Well, we've looked at two major categories, locations and some idiomatic equivalents. Let's look at some examples where on is used as part of some separable verbs. Here's what I mean. This is a super useful prefix. We often say things like, she was tired, but she kept on walking. Or, I wanted to say something, but he just kept on talking. And there'd be other examples that we could use with some other verbs like to eat on, drink on, keep on, sleep on, and so on. In all of these cases, we use the prefix weiter. This gives us sentences like these. Sie war müde, aber sie geht trotzdem weiter. Ich wollte etwas sagen, aber redete weiter. Hatte keinen Hunger mehr, aber hat trotzdem weiter gegessen. Die Party war sehr laut, aber sie schlief weiter. Und so weiter. And this final one is our equivalent of and so on or etc. in English. And by now you might have noticed that I've got a cap and a hoodie on. Ja, ich habe eine Kappe auf. This is a horizontal surface, well, as horizontal as any head can be, and ich habe mein hoodie an because my body is kind of, I suppose, like a vertical surface, I guess. Okay, well that's probably enough examples for now. Jetzt können Sie dieses Video anklicken und weiterschauen. Und wir sehen uns im nächsten Video. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.